What's up, everyone? Today we're breaking down Blood Brothers, the story of twins who should be best friends, but jealousy gets in the way and then it explodes. We're diving deep into sibling rivalry, symbolism, and one shocking moment that changes everything. Let's go. All right, so we have these twin brothers, Paul and Benji. Same DNA, but completely different personalities. Let's start with Paul. Paul is the deep thinker who loves art. The story says that there was a picture he wanted to paint that he felt he could see in his mind more clearly than with his own eyes. Now that's some deep stuff. He was also quite artistic and loved nature. The story begins with him taking his pencils and watercolors to sit under a casuarina tree and paint and think. Now, this sounds good so far, but he's got some major self-esteem issues. The story even describes it as self-contempt. Yikes. Paul is unfortunately insecure and resentful. He feels inferior to Benji and dislikes his brother's ease in doing things. A few paragraphs into the story, we learn that Benji could whistle and Paul couldn't. It might seem like a small matter to you, but Paul actually hated Benji for this small triumph. So this leads to Paul being conflicted, meaning he had conflicted feelings about his brother. On the one hand, the story says his heart filled with a full-blooded hate for his blood brother, and on the other hand, the story also tells us that he had hero worship of his twin brother. The author says it nicely when she says, Paul hated Benji with a bitter, passionate venom, and with all his heart's fierceness, he hated and despised himself for hating him. Now, while Paul is over there being hateful, let's examine Benji. Benji is the fearless, carefree one. On a nighttime walk between the casuarina trees, while Paul was timid and afraid, Benji is described as being unaware and unafraid, hopping and dancing along the road, exploiting his newly discovered whistle and flaunting his own complete lack of fear. Benji is also adventurous. He was the one who was climbing to the top of the tamarind tree, careless whether he fell, daring to crawl under the house to search for the hen's eggs in the darkness. Even I am impressed by Benji. This impressed his brother Paul too. Paul admitted that he wanted to link arms with Benji so that the two of them could walk together as one, but he was intimidated by Benji's confidence and actually just didn't admit it to him. Benji is confident and loud. He climbed trees bravely and invited his brother to play with him while he screamed and yelled, "Let's play Tarzan!" Does Paul just simply go play with him though? Nope. Paul feels like he's always in Benji's shadow. He even calls it Benji's insufferable complex of superiority, and he thinks Benji sees him as weak. When Benji asks him to play, Paul's hate flooded through his body and the blood pounded in his ears. More yikes. And you know what? Benji is unaware of Paul's resentment. He never realizes the depth of Paul's internal struggle and is surprised at Paul's attack later on. Now let's move on to the setting of the story. What if trees could talk? What if a place you loved during the day turned into a nightmare at night? Well, in Blood Brothers, the setting does exactly that. It isn't just a backdrop, it's alive with emotions, mystery, and tension. The author of the story appeals to our senses to describe the setting. He appeals to our sense of sight by writing about shimmering air, violent red flowers, swaying trees. It's very vivid. He also appeals to our sense of touch when he writes about the heavy heat that makes Paul drowsy. He uses sound when he says the trees don't just stand there, they whisper. Therefore, this setting isn't just described, it is experienced. The reader feels what Paul feels. Okay, so trees don't actually whisper, right? But what if they could? In Blood Brothers, they kinda do. Look at this quote. The Casuarina swayed and spoke in sibilant whispers. The trees are alive, almost like characters in the story. Their whispers create an eerie, mysterious vibe. Something is off. This foreshadows Paul's emotions and the tensions building in the story. Now, in the beginning of the video, I mentioned that the story contrasts daytime with nighttime. In the daytime, it is warm, inviting, and safe. But at night, it is mysterious, eerie, and ghost-like. But why is that? This is because Paul's feelings change with the setting. He is calm by day, but uneasy by night. How does this help us? This actually mirrors his internal conflict. Remember that love-hate relationship he has with Benji? The Casuarina trees literally transform, just like Paul's emotions. So let's go to the next level. The setting isn't just about description. It also has hidden meanings. So we're talking symbolism. In this story, moonlight and shadows are equated with Paul's fear and uncertainty. The Casuarina trees at night symbolize the unknown, fear, and rivalry, just like Paul versus Benji. This is how we see that the setting isn't just about place, it reinforces the story's themes. So these are the key takeaways about setting. Sensory details in the story make the setting feel real. The author uses personification to give the setting life. He uses contrast to show Paul's changing emotions, and there's also symbolism in the setting that ties the setting to themes of fear and rivalry. Of course, an analysis wouldn't be complete if we didn't talk about themes. What is the story really about? One of the first themes we can look at is hate and conflict. Paul's jealousy isn't just a minor rivalry. It festers into rage, and as a result, he comes dangerously close to harming his own twin. Now remember, whenever you're writing essays for Csec, you must always support your opinions with quotes or evidence from the story. And a quote we can use to support our opinion that hate and conflict is a theme is this one here. Paul's hate grew big. Look at him, he said to himself, strutting like a cock. He knows I'm watching him. He's only pretending that he doesn't care. So Paul has convinced himself that Benji is taunting him, and he worsens his resentment. Consequently, he fuels his own insecurities, making his hatred spiral. Another quote we can use is this one here. Paul's blood surged within him. All the accumulated jealousy and worship of the years flooded through him. He ran across the room and stood over him, the awl poised in his right hand for a swift, murderous blow. So Paul's emotions finally explode in an uncontrollable burst of fury, and in turn, he nearly commits an irreversible act, proving how unchecked bitterness can lead to destruction. The second theme we can look at is love and family, because despite Paul being full of hatred for his brother, he actually doesn't truly, completely despise Benji. Deep down, he longs for a bond, which means that his internal battle makes his emotions even more complicated. How do we know that he longs for this bond? Let's use this quote here. He yearned with every fiber of him to share with Benji the secret ways of his heart. So that fits perfectly. And even so, Paul is terrified of rejection, so he keeps his feelings hidden. This leads to his love twisting into resentment instead of forming a connection. A second quote we can use for this theme of love and family is this one here. In quiet moments as now, it was easy for him to love his brother as himself. Nevertheless, his love for Benji remains buried beneath layers of conflict, and ultimately this struggle highlights the fine line between love and rivalry in families. On to the third theme, appearance versus reality. Although Benji never called Paul a coward, Paul is convinced he sees him as weak, and for this reason he lets his assumption define their relationship. Quote, Paul knew that in Benji's eyes he was a coward, but there is no actual evidence that Benji looks down on him. Thus, Paul has allowed his own doubts to shape his reality. Another way that we know this is this quote here. Then he saw the look of incomprehension on his brother's face, the look of why, what have I done? Benji was never the villain. He never even knew Paul felt this way. And because of this, Paul's hatred turns out to be built on a false perception. The fourth theme we're going to look at is fear and jealousy. Even though Paul views Benji as a problem, his real battle is with himself. Consequently, his self-doubt morphs into jealousy, which fuels his hatred. How do we know? This quote here. His self-contempt and distaste for his own chicken-heartedness. So meanwhile, Paul's anger isn't truly directed at Benji. It is directed at himself. It's his own shortcomings that he resents. So this in turn makes him obsess over his brother's confidence. Look at this next quote. Trembling and confused and frightened by the violence of his action, but purged of hate and happy in the discovery that his brother also knew fear. At last, Paul realizes something unexpected. Benji isn't fearless after all. From this moment on, he is freed of his resentment and proving that even the bravest, such as his brother, have fears. Okay. So now we're on to the final part of the video where we talk about the plot. Now, if you haven't read the story yet or you would like to see a reading of that story, you can look right up here where there's an animated video where I read the entire story for you. If you just want a refresher, you can stick with me while we go through the exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution of Blood Brothers. If you like, you can pause right here and take a screenshot of this information, or you can use it as notes for a summary or whatever you have to do for homework. So first, the exposition. In the exposition of this story, Paul and Benji are introduced. We see that they are twins, but they have opposite personalities. Aspects of Paul's personality are introduced, such as him being introverted, artistic, reflective, and we see that Benji is confident, adventurous, and carefree. The author also shows us the setting. We know that it's a quiet village with casuarina trees, and part of the setting is also Mac the shoemaker's shop. We also get hints of Paul's internal struggle, where he admires Benji but starts resenting him. Then we move on to the rising actions. These are the things that happen before the climax. Paul watches Benji thrive and feels increasing jealousy. The casuarina again make an appearance, and we see that the trees at night begin to look ghost-like, and they symbolize Paul's emotional turmoil. The tension grows. Paul still believes Benji thinks he is weak, but he longs for his approval. And we also see the symbolism of the leather in Mac's shop, which reflects Paul's attempts to reshape his identity. And then things start to get saucy. Paul snaps. His jealousy turns into rage and action. He physically attacks Benji, and this is fueled by years of bottled up resentment. Benji is in complete shock, and he shows that he never realized Paul's inner struggle. After this happens, and heading toward the resolution, we have the falling actions. We see that Benji is confused. He never saw this coming. Paul sees the fear in Benji's eyes for the first time, and there is a shift in power. Paul finally feels like he has control over his emotions, while Benji now feels vulnerable. And at the end of the story, the resolution, we have Paul realizing that they are more alike than he thought, and the relationship between Benji and Paul has now changed forever. Paul sees that Benji is no longer untouchable. Paul's self-perception shifts and he defines himself outside of Benji's shadow. So that's it. I hope you have enjoyed this analysis of Blood Brothers, and I hope it has been useful to you. If it has, please share with your friends, like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next analysis. Bye bye.